Good afternoon. My name is Wilmarie Newton, and I'd like to thank you for joining us for today's webinar. We will be answering your questions at the end of the presentation, at which time you can type them into the question box. If you have further questions after the webinar has ended, please feel free to email them to me and I will forward them to the appropriate person that can answer them. Please note that this webinar is being recorded and will be archived on CABE's website under Professional Development. And now I'd like to introduce Patrice McCarthy, Executive Director and General Counsel for CABE.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us. CABE is delighted to partner with CAPSS in delivering this very informative webinar based on a report entitled A Good Life for Every Student. We're going to look at the report as well as how in Connecticut already high schools have embraced a variety of pathways to student success. I was just listening to the legislature's Executive and Legislative Nominations Committee hearing where there are 4 candidates for the State Board of Education that have been nominated by the governor. 2 of them are sitting members of the state board, and 1 has a particular background and expertise in agriculture science. And it was very interesting to hear the interest of legislators in the pathways that are available already to students who want to explore that field and be prepared for perhaps work immediately after high school, or the option of higher education either then or at a later point in life. So I think that was very encouraging and relevant to today's conversation. And also the legislature is most likely going to establish a working group to look at high school graduation requirements. So I think that this report will also inform the work of that committee. I now want to turn the program over to Chelsea Waite, who will lead us through our session this afternoon. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks so much, Patrice, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm Chelsea Waite. I'm a research principal at the Center on Reinventing Public Education, which is a research and policy center at Arizona State University. And I'm joined here by my colleague, Maddy Sims. Maddy, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thanks so much, Chelsea. It's great to be here. My name is Maddy Sims. I'm a director at Columbia University's Center for Public Research and Leadership, or CPRL, and I'm just really excited to be here with you all today to explore some of the findings from our research and their implications for Connecticut's districts, schools, educators, and students.
Great. Well, before we get started with sharing a little bit about our research report, we wanted to invite our panel to say hello and share a little bit about, introduce themselves as well. Today's plan is that after these introductions, Maddy and I will give a short presentation about the report, and then we'll turn to a great panel conversation among all of these brilliant folks who are on the call with us today. So to get us started, as context, the topic of this webinar today really grew directly from the research study that Maddy and I will talk about, and is about how high schools are supporting every young person to design and follow through on an individualized post-secondary plan. And a lot of our research focused on centering student voice. And so as I ask our panelists to introduce themselves, we wanted to ask each of you to share first, of course, your name and your position, the school or organization that you're joining us from, and then one student story that really drove home for you the importance of supporting students to thoughtfully consider and pursue multiple post-secondary pathways. So that could be your own story, a student you worked with directly, or a student that you learned about. So why don't we start? We'll go on the order of our panelists on the screen. So Liz, I'd love to invite you to kick us off.
Liz, you're muted.
I think we still can't hear you, Liz.
Okay, am I unmuted? Okay, good. Sorry about that. Anyway, it's a pleasure to be here. My name is Liz Brown. I'm serving my 4th term on the Board of Education in Waterbury. I'm currently serving as the vice president. I was the former president of CABE and still on the executive committee. And very interested in this topic.
Thanks so much, Liz. If you're
You want to
share a story.
Okay, I have a great story. When I talked to Maddy, I was telling her that we had an internship program this summer, really placing students in all kinds of municipal organizations, fire department, police department, all the tax department and all the departments. Anyway, at our meeting in September, we had one young lady who was with the firemen all summer. And she didn't, unbeknownst to her, the whole fire department, she was an intern, showed up at the meeting. And it was just so exciting to see her and their glowing report of how good she was, and that they wanted her to continue to be the first firewoman in Waterbury. So it was very exciting to see that, and she was just glowing. So I think exposing our students to all kinds of different pathways, especially young women, is very exciting.
Thanks so much, Liz. Let's go next to Eve.
Sorry about that. Hello, I'm Eve Lapointe. I am coming to you from Francis D. Maloney High School in Meriden, Connecticut. And one student story I feel really resonated with me recently is I've had a friend reach out to me who graduated last year, and he has very, very much detail described to me how he does regret the path he took, and he's felt like he doesn't have any backup plans. And so recently he's been trying to make a backup plan that has felt like unprepared. So I feel like having second pathways be instilled into students from the get-go is very important.
Thank you so much, Eve, for bringing voice to your friend's story. Let's go to Shannon next.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Shannon Marimón. I'm Executive Director of ReadyCT. And also, I noticed it mentions I just started as a Board of Education member in West Hartford, Connecticut. So wearing a couple hats, but ReadyCT is a statewide nonprofit in Connecticut based out of Hartford that focuses on the intersection between K-12 education and workforce, and ensuring that there's better alignment and awareness of how the work world is shifting and changing, so that we can then have our school systems kind of respond to that and be thoughtful about what it will then require to adequately prepare students to set them up for success when they are greeted with the real world post-graduation. And I think a lot of what we've learned over the last few years, I'm hoping we'll go into this in more detail, is just that students are really craving this kind of experience. They're looking for hands-on, real world project-based learning that helps them understand why they're having to learn what they're learning, and you see them just completely come to life when that light bulb goes off. So in terms of a student story, there are many, but I'll tell one that's a little more personal about why I even got into this work in the first place. Is that when I was a junior in high school, we were coming in for my school counselor meeting with my parents, and a student was leaving who was a senior, and the counselor was like shaking her head as we walked in, and she said, "I don't know what to do with that student. He's graduating, he doesn't have a plan, he doesn't know what he wants to do, and I don't know what to offer him." And my dad is an HVAC contractor, and he said, "Well, what's he looking to do?" And she's like, "I don't know, he seems to like to work with his hands, but I don't know a lot of employers in the community, I don't know how to help him." So my dad said, "Well, tell him to call me and we'll see what we can make work." And 25 years later, that individual was still working for my father. He just left actually to take on a new opportunity that advanced his career even further. But it was just, I think that was a moment where in a school system where college was the only option, that the school kind of counselors in particular really knew how to guide or advise that there need to be other paths for students to be valued and succeed. And so just that's, I think, a little bit about why I am where I am.
Thank you so much, Shannon. Christina, how about you?
Good afternoon, everyone. Dr. Christina Martineau, Superintendent of Schools in Westbrook, a shoreline of Connecticut, for those of you who are in other areas of the state. But what an exciting study. I cannot wait for the discussion. This is an area that I've long had an interest in, even way back when as a student myself. But one of my favorite parts of my job that I also did when I was a high school principal years ago was senior exit surveys, where having that opportunity to hear directly from students one-on-one with the superintendent and at that time the high school principal, and hearing from them in that moment, that April, May time when their lives are really starting to change and all of their academics and all of their experiences from that school system are coming together into that transition into next step, next life, and listening from them one-on-one, like, what are your hopes and dreams? What did we get right as a school system, as a school community to support those dreams and aspirations? You know, did we offer the right courses? Did you have the right career explorations? When I began in Westbrook, they were just starting to launch their career pathways program. You know, COVID, they had done a lot of groundwork with it, and then COVID hit. So my first group of senior exit interviews, the kids were excited. They knew it was coming, but they were seniors and leaving, and they had this really disruptive experience in school. And in meeting those students later, when they come back to visit, right? It's a small community, we see them all the time. You know, they like to share that, you know, they're hearing from their neighbors, they're hearing from their friends and their cousins and their younger siblings that we're getting it right, that the experiences that we now provide with not just work shadows and internships, but the way the pathways have been laid out, because it emerged from really the entire community. Like, that student voice has informed the pathways. Our business partners have informed the pathways, our teachers, our school counselors. Leslie Carson, our career and college coordinator, who really has done so much of the heavy lift with this, describes it as the ecosystem, what we describe as the village, right, that lifts up each individual student. But in terms of like specific student voices, it's hard to pick one, because we're at a point where we're entering year 4, and 100% of our students are in this ecosystem, if you will, defining who they want to be at this given moment, right? So it's the pathway they think they're interested in at the age of 14. They constantly have experiences and opportunities here in Westbrook to think about multiple pathways. Maybe it's 3 of these, maybe it's a secondary track, maybe I'm interested in public service, maybe I'm interested in the tourism industry, but being able to explore that, and it's personalized, and we listen to the students, and they have a lot of mentor support that is our teachers, our counselors, Board of Ed members, Board of Finance members. It really is like a full community effort. But the stories that resonate are the ones where the students say to me in these exit interviews, you know, I was really lost as a 9th grader. Well, you're 14. It's okay if you don't know who you want to be when you grow up. Many of us are still trying to figure that out if we're taking another pathway. But to hear their stories that, you know, I was really interested in history is the one. There are 2 or 3 students that sort of resonate with me, but they didn't know why or what that looked like in the real world. Does it mean going to college and majoring in history? One student in particular, you know, we had a strong group gather around and support the student and connecting them with the town planner in Westbrook. Students don't know what a town planner is. Adults don't understand what a town planner does, but that internship was critical. It shaped the pathway, and it shaped multiple pathways for that student. So choosing a similar major, thinking about geography, but also thinking about town planning and how that passion intersects and the joy that came out of that experience, that internship. And it's not as simple as here's the pathway in the book on page 17, but that's the start of the information. But finding that joy and making sure that we're talking to the kids, like, here's the pathway, but what makes you happy? You know, what do you love to do? Because that's the dream that will have you putting in the 10,000 hours, you know, and you'll love what you do every day. And if you don't, you know that there are other pathways and opportunities for you. So it's hard to narrow it down to one. I've got a list of like 8 stories that I outlined, but I'll save it for, hopefully it'll come up later in our discussion.
That's a great one. Thank you so much. And let's round it out with Flora.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Flora Padro. I'm the principal of Hartford Public High School. For me, the Pathways has been a way to engage students or re-engage students that have been kind of out of the process, kind of out of the engagement academic process within the schools, to kind of bring them back. What we have seen through our work with expanding our pathways, we launched a new pathway in allied health about 3 years ago. We expanded our engineering program. What that has yielded was has been more females in the STEM field, specifically within engineering, having lucrative internships within Pratt & Whitney, Black & Decker, and so on. We have a lot of great industry partnerships, but the end result of all of that has been better chronic absenteeism rate, better daily attendance, less suspension rates, and honestly bridging the gap between the labor needs of Connecticut and the shortages that we're seeing and the cycles of poverty that we also see within the schools. So within our program, we've been able to have students obtain actual real life credentials that they can then get entry-level employment. And for a lot of our students, after going through this process, earning college credits and being able to have these credentials, they've been able to go to the workforce. There's one young lady in particular that I think of. My first year, she was a straight A student, and then her grades started wavering a little. At that time, 3 years ago, we had 2 females in the entire engineering program of over 200 students. And this young lady turns out was going through some horrendous situations at home. We believe in wraparound services. We believe in meeting all of the needs internally of the student. We got that student help, but one of the things that maintained her engagement in school was the work that she was doing in the engineering department, because she saw it as a means to get out of her circumstances, have a better life, and in turn, provide a better life for her siblings. And that really stuck with me, right? Because this is beyond the academics. We're providing opportunities and a lens of equity that sometimes is missing from our communities. And what we have done since, proud to say, is that we have significantly expanded our engineering program for female students, but vice versa. Also increased our male students within the CNA and patient care technician programs we have, so that we can break down those stigmas, provide those opportunities, meet the demands, the labor demands of Connecticut, and also have the students understand that they have a place at the table where they typically did not feel like they belong. So that is our story.
Thank you so much, Flora. And thank you, everybody. These introductions are making me really excited to get back to the panel portion a little bit later. For now, we'll say goodbye to you just for a moment while Maddy and I share a little bit more about the research study. The other reason these stories have been so powerful is because I think they really illustrate something that we all know, which is that high school experiences can be one of the things that make or break a young person's development during teen years and their transition to adulthood on a path to success. And we know that when high schools are designed to ensure every young person, including those who face the most adversity, feel supported and challenged and confident in their learning and their potential, then schools can lay the groundwork for students to thrive. But most schools are not designed this way, especially as secondary schooling has evolved. High schools have long been places that were meant to sort students into categories that might privilege some and then restrict opportunities for others. And we know high schools have been remarkably resistant to change, despite lots of major social and economic shifts, and also clear evidence that the pandemic has widened the sort of inequities and caused a range of negative impacts on students. So with that context in mind, when we started this study back in 2021, we were particularly curious to learn how high schools might be changing in and around this pandemic period. We knew already that a lot of experimentation had happened during the pandemic and that students and families had learned a lot about what they needed from schools. So we were wondering, were there any longer term shifts that resulted, especially in service of better learning experiences and outcomes for historically marginalized students in particular? So to find some answers, we decided to study 6 high schools at a really deep level over a period of 20 months. We chose 6 high schools that were all quite different from each other. Some were small and specialized, some were large and comprehensive. They were operating across a range of contexts, including in Connecticut. But all 6 schools had previously demonstrated that they were really committed to reimagining and improving high school. And so with those 6 schools, we conducted 266 interviews with students and recent graduates, with caregivers, administrators, and teachers, starting in the spring of 2022 through the end of last year, 2023. And we wanted to know, when we were doing all of these interviews, we wanted to try to understand, what does success mean for students and the adults in their lives? How are their schools changing to ensure that every student has the opportunity to learn and thrive? And then, where are schools succeeding, and also what challenges do they face in this new normal post-pandemic? So I'm going to hand it over to Maddy for our findings on the first 2 questions, and then come back to the third.
Thanks, Chelsea. So what did we learn? In our interviews, we heard educators, administrators, students, and caregivers really all beginning to articulate what we came to see as a real updated purpose for high school. And what they were doing to pursue that purpose also suggested the need for changes to the very design of our high school communities. So first, the purpose. We heard that high school should really prepare young people not just for college or work, but to be well, to be fulfilled, happy adults with stable, family-sustaining incomes, strong communities, and real choices about what opportunities to pursue, a lot of which we heard actually in some of the panelist intros just a moment ago. And because young people aren't monolithic in their interests and their passions and their needs, high school should really help students discern what success means for themselves and how to achieve it. Among our research team and in our report, we actually started referring to this updated vision as a good life, which is actually a phrase we borrowed from a couple teachers that we interviewed who designed a new course with this name. And to enable this broader vision of success, which is, of course, as many of you probably are already thinking about, it's a real notable departure from earlier conceptions of the goal of high school. Schools in our study were challenging a ton of assumptions, including moving away from a college for all mindset in favor of really a wider spectrum of viable post-secondary paths. Other schools were rejecting the idea of high school graduation as a finish line of sorts, and instead really focusing on ensuring that students are leaving not just with a diploma, but also really those tangible skills, those relationships that will really set them up for longer term success, whether or not their plans do include college in the immediate term. Educators and administrators in our study recognize that helping students discern their own vision of success doesn't just require tweaks or small improvements, but it actually does require new ways of working and learning, which is very exciting, but of course also no small task. It also requires new partnerships beyond the 4 walls of the school, and it really requires that schools focus on students' individual strengths, needs, and aspirations. So with that, what kinds of new ways of working and learning did we observe schools pursuing? So we observed schools seeking to really design learning environments where adults support each student individually rather than expecting students to conform to a one-size-fits-all model. Relatedly, we observed a real focus on adolescent development, self-determination, and student agency. Third, we observed schools focusing considerable efforts on ensuring relevant and rigorous learning experiences that really develop those foundational skills for higher education, career, and life down the line, including a really strong sense of self and purpose. While only some schools in our study were using the term deeper learning, which some of you may be familiar with, all spoke about really strengthening students' ability to not just really sort of succeed in the classroom, but also draw those connections across academic disciplines within their community and to the broader world in which they're living. And then finally, schools are increasingly focusing on supporting students to develop a customized post-secondary plan rather than either focusing uniformly on college or assuming, on the other hand, that a high school diploma is enough for future success. So it's this 4th finding, this focus on individualized post-secondary exploration and preparation that we really want to focus on during our time with you all today. So to help paint a picture for folks of some of the data that we collected, we want to share a couple examples of what we heard from stakeholders that they wanted from their high schools. While there's certainly not full consensus around any of these ideas, we did choose snippets that are representative of some of the themes that we heard during our interviews. So first, as you actually already heard in some of our panelists' introductions, students want broader exposure to what's possible after high school, including paths that don't necessarily require an immediate college degree. Chelsea, can I ask you to read this quote from one of the students in our study?
Yes. So this student said, I think my school could focus less on university and more on helping families and other students learn how to research all their options. A lot of students will go into career paths or something that they were just constantly exposed to as a kid. So I think giving kids a broader exposure to what's out there and what they can do to achieve that is important.
Thanks so much, Chelsea. And so in addition to getting the student perspective, we also spoke with a lot of families and caregivers. And what we heard from caregivers is a really strong interest in having their children have actual experiences with the potential post-secondary pathways that they might pursue, to get a flavor of what they like, and equally importantly, what they don't like, what brings them joy, and how do they really not like spending their time. Chelsea, are you able to read this quote as well?
Yeah, this caregiver said, I think they need to get out and shadow. Like, you shouldn't be able to just blindly make a decision about what you want to do with the rest of your life. My daughter originally thought that she wanted to go into physical therapy, and then she went and shadowed one, and she hated it.
Which is really important to know sooner rather than later. And then finally, as we mentioned earlier, we also spoke with a bunch of teachers. And what we heard is that educators want learning to be an experience that helps students really connect their learning to work that they might want to do in the future. So Chelsea, I'll ask you one more time if you don't mind reading this quote, which I love.
Great. This one, I think we can do a much better job of trapping kids in the honey of each content area. To be a writer is such a powerful thing. To be a scientist is such a powerful thing.
That one really stood with me. And so as we heard all of this input and feedback, and as high schools are hearing all this input and feedback from their students and from their communities, we really set out to understand how schools are responding to better meet these needs. And we observed a couple key changes across the schools in our study that we believe can be informative for other schools embarking on similar redesign efforts. First, we saw that student advising systems on career paths and work-based learning opportunities was really quite nascent compared to the infrastructure for college advising, but that schools were starting to change that. At 2 schools we studied, the student advising process now guarantees that every student will discuss and record a post-secondary plan with an advisor. One school had broadened a program that previously focused exclusively on college counseling to really include a broader array of post-secondary options, including entrepreneurship paths, opportunities in the military. We observed the launch of career centers that include workforce roundtables with local employers. Several schools are expanding internships that give students an opportunity to really roll up their sleeves and earn high school credit for on-the-job experience. And then finally, it was incredibly energizing, and you'll hear more about during the panel, to learn about how schools are pursuing partnerships with both organizations such as ReadyCT, regional workforce centers, to support students to really earn industry-recognized credentials while still in high school. And these credentials allow students to not only get recognition for the knowledge and skills they're building, but in many cases to actually enter the workforce at more competitive pay rates immediately following graduation. So as schools are embarking on these changes, there are several tough questions that they're grappling with as they try to ensure that they're really supporting every student. And so for this, I will pass the microphone back over to you, Chelsea, to dive into some of these challenges.
Great. Thanks, Maddie. So yeah, one of the most fascinating parts of this study was really coming to understand the challenges that schools were grappling with as they tried to enable every student to go on to lead a good life. And so I'm going to briefly preview all 3 challenges that we wrote about in the report and then dive into one of them in particular. So first, schools were really wrestling with how to support and challenge every student. So especially through the pandemic, schools had provided students with substantial flexibility and a lot of support to navigate what was a really disruptive and traumatic time, of course. They were also, especially as time went on, increasingly acknowledging sort of the risk that too much flexibility could result in less rigor and lower expectations, depending on how it was being offered and implemented, and if it wasn't pushing students and supporting them to really work through challenges and engage with harder material. So that's the first challenge. The second is that schools were mostly relying on a pretty narrow set of traditional indicators for success, like maybe SAT scores or graduation rates, things like that. And that was in spite of their growing recognition that those indicators alone are insufficient. And so non-traditional outcomes mattered to them just as much, like the supportive relationships that students were developing, or the number of pathways that were open to them after high school graduation. But most schools we found still had pretty limited ability to access the data that they knew they needed, sort of the right data that they knew they needed to use in real time to support student learning and post-secondary planning. And then third, on a related note, schools were really grappling with how to make their aspiration to help every student develop an individualized post-secondary plan a reality. And so that is the challenge that we'll really focus on today, even though all those three are interconnected. So I think next I'll dig into two concrete components of this challenge and then wrap up with some of the recommendations that we concluded with in the report. The first dimension of this challenge is about the equity risks of embracing a broader range of post-secondary pathways. So we already know at this moment in time that college access gaps are actually growing and not shrinking. So I wanted to share a couple of observations from our study about how to make sure that embracing a wider range of pathways actually expands opportunity for historically marginalized students rather than restricting it. And one key theme in our analysis is that what exactly a good post-secondary plan looks like remained pretty underdefined. We were hearing a lot of staff in the schools that we were interviewing seeming to judge the quality of students' post-secondary plans more kind of by feel. So we heard some educators saying things like, well, getting a minimum wage job at a fast food restaurant isn't enough of a plan. But like the quote on the slide says, schools generally didn't have a clear rubric for how to judge that a student's plan really is viable and could lead to different career options and a family sustaining income over time. And so of course, without criteria for what a high quality plan looks like, it's a lot easier potentially for uneven expectations to flourish, even unintentionally. For example, maybe assuming that students who want to pursue a trade probably won't ever need college-ready academic skills. And so that could actually mean schools end up restricting post-secondary opportunities for students with potential troubling disparities in who gets encouraged towards college and who doesn't. And so with that in mind, our analysis really strongly suggested to us that schools need to create a really robust and well understood set of expectations for what high quality post-secondary plans look like. And we did see some promising efforts on that front. Some schools were beginning to articulate what good or high quality means around a post-secondary plan. And they were also helping their counseling departments to develop familiarity with a wider range of pathways. This is reminding me of the story that Shannon shared in the beginning, so that students aren't either sent only to a college counseling office or to a career counselor. They're actually coached in both and all potential pathways. The second dimension of the challenge that we wanted to elevate has to do with scaling career-connected learning. So schools in the study were really clear about how they needed to open up both college access for students and help students explore possible career pathways and get a sense of what it's like to work in different fields, maybe even get a head start on training or credentials in their field of choice. And mostly we heard that career-connected learning was important for all students, but we saw that the opportunities for career-connected learning seemed to lag pretty far behind the belief in its importance. So some of the issues that we were observing included that the scale of offerings was pretty limited. So for example, very small work-based learning programs. There was, in some cases, a lack of student awareness of opportunities for career-connected learning. Certainly around advising and counseling, some insufficient advising on the expansive possibilities for post-secondary plans, which might include include apprenticeships, learn and earn programs, entry-level jobs with reliable advancement opportunities, and more like that. We heard plenty about state policies and particularly barriers around seat time-based credit requirements, and the quote on the slide illustrates that a bit. And then lastly, we also heard a bit of a hint about some resistance and questions from families and some teachers about how an increased focus on career exploration maybe could mean that the school was less focused on college, as if it were sort of an either-or situation. And again, here we did see some promising efforts. So we saw several schools launching or expanding courses that help students draw connections between their interests and future job opportunities. And we also saw some schools partnering with local nonprofits, as Maddy mentioned before, to launch and scale Pathways programming. And so to wrap us up here, I mean, ultimately, while we did see some promising efforts in schools, and we do think that schools can make some progress alone, they also really need support from state and local education leaders. And so there are 3 recommendations that we wanted to elevate here at the end of the presentation. First is that we recommended that state and local leaders should really thoughtfully engage families, educators, community partners, and advocates to help articulate shared beliefs about which high school experiences and outcomes will actually enable every student to achieve a good life. And so those strong stakeholder partnerships and engagement can also be the bedrock for the high school redesign efforts that follow, that are then grounded in that shared vision. Secondly, we recommended that leaders provide guidance that will help schools define what a high quality, individualized post-secondary plan can look like, so that the plans students develop may differ, but the opportunities that they afford don't. And then third, we recommend, there we go. Third, we recommended that both state and local leaders should support new or changed policies and practices that expand career-connected learning and college access together, so that students aren't getting tracked into either a college path or a career path, but are actually developing both college and career-ready skills that can open up the range of choices that they have. And so with that, I actually want to hand it back to Maddy and transition to our panelists, who will help us further kind of ground lots of these findings and recommendations in their own experiences. And just as a reminder, as we transition over, please do feel free to put your questions into the Q&A box, and we'll do our best to answer as many as we can by the end.
Thanks so much, Chelsea, and definitely want to invite back all of our wonderful panelists as we transition to our discussion portion. So to kick this portion off, I'd love to hear from all of our panelists, really just a quick sentence or 2 about what you hope will be true in 5 to 10 years, but isn't so true today, about how high schools are supporting students' post-secondary planning. Flora, am I able to start with you?
Absolutely. So I think something that's not often discussed is what happens with our international community and post-secondary planning. We have things in place to ensure that 100% of our seniors have a post-secondary plan, that our juniors and our all the way down to our freshmen are starting to lift this work, right? But what happens is, even though we are able to offer these opportunities and have different programs and have, you know, internship and job shadowing opportunities, some of our students don't qualify for some of these paid internships, and or after graduation are not really able to either earn their credentials or do anything with the credentials. This also affects the school's post-secondary data. So for example, students may be able to apply for or fill out complete the information for the ACTIS, but they may not qualify for the ACTIS or for the FAFSA. And so for a school like mine that has over 40% multilingual learners, it becomes a challenge to really capture what that post-secondary data is going to look like for all students. So In 5 years, I hope that there's some legislative change to be able to account for all students, not just some students. Right now, there isn't a way to really capture that. And so schools like mine with a high special population will always plateau at a certain number when it comes to our state accountability factors. That and the fact that we are, explaining to students that we have these great opportunities, but in reality, they're not going to be able to capitalize on a lot of those great opportunities just by the nature of some of the laws out there. I don't think it's impossible. I think this could be a bipartisan issue, but it definitely is a larger issue of policy.
Thanks so much, Flora. We'll go in the reverse order of last time. Christina, what about you? What would you hope to be true in 5 to 10 years?
Oops, still there. Oh, sorry, accidentally hit the camera button. I think I would certainly echo what Flora has shared. People are often surprised when I say Westbrook is approaching 30% with a multilingual population, and that is very much an area that we hope to continue to grow in. As much as our efforts are designing personalized plans for 100% of our graduating seniors, and we continue to expand partnerships, bringing in individuals who are fluent in Portuguese and fluent in Spanish to be able to talk about their experiences in the tourism or working at electric boat, in welding or pipe fitting, or their experiences in college or how it led to their chosen career path. It's that access later. What can we do to continue to remove barriers and remove obstacles so that all of our good intentions and plans to support that multilingual population are able to be realized for them 5-10 years from graduation and high school. Also for us, we're so small. Pre-K-12, we are right around 601 students. So we have 22 pathways, and when we talk about pathways here, we're specifically talking about, the business industry pathways, hospitality and tourism. And within that pathway, creating expectations and opportunities for 100% of our students to access college credit for that chosen pathway, to access trade certifications so that the pathways are already embedded with that college and career readiness, and then the path of choosing which way to go, or all of the paths, is open to them. But because we are so small and we create these programs, welding is the one that we have put so much time and energy into. We are so grateful to have a very strong partnership with Electric Boat. But when we come to a point where we've built a program with 3 or 4 students who are accessing Metals 4, for example, and obtaining that American welding certification, how can we continue to sustain that very specific program for a small cohort of students and also honor and support different pathways because of our side? So I hope, 5 and 10 years, that regional model that we are all hopeful, looking at my neighbor to the north a little bit, Clinton, they have an incredible advanced machining program, so that policies and laws and barriers that prohibit some of that regional sharing make it easier to have those regional partnerships. So these small school districts, they want to keep their community programs and schools, but we're very open to that regionalization portion of sharing resources. So I hope that's what I see, that sustainability. And then also that you build a program with a whole team, right? That ecosystem I talked about before, and people, and it's not built just on one person, so that when someone leaves the district or retires, that good work continues in the future, and it's not just this special program and pathway of support that we have for a very small period of time, but that it's sustainable 10 years, 15 years from now. So I guess that's a lot. Three things, 3 big hopes for the next 5 or 10 years.
No, I appreciate all that. Thank you, Christina. Shannon, would love to bring you in. What do you hope is true?
Sure, so many things. But to build off what Christina was saying, I would say that I would want to continue to recognize and celebrate students who are picking what are considered alternative paths, but are just a path, another path. Like, it shouldn't be an alternative path. It's just of the many options they have available. How do we equally kind of consistently celebrate and recognize those? And Electric Boat is a company that is really stepped up, and they have something called a signing day every spring, where they bring, I think last year was 160 plus students who came out with their families to celebrate the fact that they were signing on for full employment offers upon graduation from high school to work at Electric Boat. And it was celebrated the same way you would celebrate, you know, the award ceremony for the college book awards, you know, which just hasn't historically been part of the culture. And I think even we've talked about in our own organization, we have a post-secondary transition program called Student 5.0, where we work with high school seniors who have arrived at the end of their senior year and do not have a post-secondary plan. And we stay with them for up to 12 months after they graduate. And we've talked about celebrating their paths, which take them in all different directions, and you know, getting a page in the newspaper. You know, usually you see all the names of where all the colleges where students are going. We want to show the different opportunities that these students have explored and succeeded in, and make sure that we're lifting that up just as much. So I think that changing the narrative is going to be really critical for both the school systems and the family and parent community, because they can be sometimes the biggest resistors to some of this change. I'd say policy-wise would want that alignment as well, to make sure that students have more access to career-connected learning and work-based learning. And some of our high school graduation requirements and compliance requirements are standing in the way of that. So I think if we could remove those obstacles. And then just back to a program like Student 5.0, we have about 12,000 students per year who graduate from high school in Connecticut public schools and do not show up at a 2 or 4 year college, and they're just kind of lost. You know, there's nobody who is really focused on that population of individuals, and that's, I think, a key need, is to identify what that program would look like at scale. Our program can only work with 200 students a year, and when there's 12,000, that can feel really daunting. So I think we just need to think really differently about the design and delivery of those kinds of student-centered support programs.
Yeah, so powerful. Thank you, Shannon. Eve, what about you from your perspective as a current high school student? What do you hope is true in 5 to 10 years that isn't so true today?
I hope schools are able to make confident students that are not just going into careers or paths blindly hoping for the best outcome, but also students who are just been given a chance to test and experience their path out. Especially with continuing your path beyond high school, you tend to lose a lot of the sports. And so going into something with full commitment, not knowing if you truly like it, is a very big risk. So schools have been able to make students who actually been able to experience their path and know it's true for them.
Yeah, I love that. Thanks, Eve. And Liz, can you round us out? What do you hope to be true in the next 5 to 10 years?
Well, I echo everything everybody said. I think they're great ideas, but I would focus on really setting high expectations. And I think sometimes, especially in the urban districts, we face a lot of challenges, and I think we need to raise the bar. Waterbury has implemented tremendous career opportunities. We've got 5 academies: manufacturing, the trades, teachers rising, health. I mean, we've really expanded opportunities exponentially over the past 5 years. That said, I think the barriers to kind of these partnerships and internships, transportation is a huge issue for our students. How do they get to these internships? How do they get to these job shadowings? That's not built into our budget at all. And then you have the other idea of resources. You know, to me, it boils down to resources at this point, because I think we need those support systems in our schools. And it's very difficult to find counselors and social workers and these kind of staff. And they're the first to go in a budget. Let's face it. I mean, they're the first to go. So it's hard to sustain this. And I think the state has passed a law many years ago that every student is supposed to have a student success plan. I mean, that law was passed many years ago. So I think we're trying to catch up to that vision of every student having a success plan. Waterbury has really embraced the portrait of a graduate. And I think that is the basis for kind of a student success plan. So I would encourage people to go back and look at that big push for the student portrait of a student that does have, you know, tentacles, if you will, to careers and college. Those are fundamental skills. I think one of the students here said, you know, to be, you know, to have the skills to navigate all this. And I think the portrait the graduate is fundamental to that. I really want to echo what Flora said, though. I mean, in Waterbury, I've got 20% of our students who don't speak English, and we don't have the capacity. So we're kind of like looking at how do we get teachers? We're kind of, going upstream here, trying to even provide the basics. So I think the idea of resources and the population. So in 5 years, I hope to build the capacity to really serve our students who are not, speaking English speakers. And I think that's really important. And also what Flora said, of course, Hartford, Waterbury, we share a lot of the same, concerns, but it really is a matter of poverty. I mean, we've got 700 kids who are considered homeless in Waterbury. I mean, come on, let's get real here. We're trying to do all this, kind of esoteric. We're trying to keep kids in school, fed, clothed, nurtured. It's a very difficult situation. So that said, I'll go back to high expectations for every student and really taking them where they are and giving them hope that there is a pathway for them as individuals.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of work cut out for everyone over the next 5 to 10 years, but the good news is lots of good work and good ideas to build off of. So with that, would love to direct the next question to Flora and Christina. You both have a view into sort of district and school level work to expand students' access to post-secondary exploration and post-secondary planning. And Flora, would love to start with you and hear a little bit about what are you seeing to be, amidst all these challenges, what are you seeing as some of the really promising and effective strategies versus for you, sort of what continues to maybe keep you up at night and continue to be really challenging?
I can speak to the challenge first because it's literally keeping up me at night right now.
Sure.
And the challenge right now is that sustainability piece. It does take resources, and resources take money. But these things are not budgeted into larger budgets, and keeping politics out of it, sometimes it becomes an issue of which group of children do we serve first, right? And the answer is we serve all kids. If we're going to say we serve all kids, then we serve little ones and we serve the ones in high schools equally, and through the lens that we are trying to diminish the cycles of poverty. Right. For us, our biggest wins have been in expanding those opportunities and working with ReadyCT. I don't think I mentioned that before. ReadyCT is in our building and has been all sorts of instrumental in creating the job shadowing, the internship opportunity, but working with school-based staff, right, with our college and career specialists, working with our guidance counselors, our school counselors, working with administration to ensure that every day of the week there is something happening for our students. So for example, we have Military Mondays, Trade Tuesdays, Workforce Wednesdays, so that we can offer students the variety, the whole gamut of whatever your dream is. We're going to try to get you there. And if you don't know what that dream is, we're going to do all sorts of career exploration so that you can kind of put your feelers out there and see what is it that you kind of want to pursue. You don't need to have 100% of that answer, but you will participate in this programming. And what we have seen is students rise to that occasion. The high expectations are already set. They don't always necessarily have the soft skills needed to be successful in those placements. So working backwards, we've made sure that we have a college and career specialist. That was a strategic hire for us. We make sure that we are addressing the transportation issue. So using grant sources, we wrote it right into our grants and have bus passes for the foreseeable future. We have, relationships with Hartford Healthcare and other industry that provide transportation. Well, how about all the social, emotional, and other needs? We have a food pantry. We have the clothing pantry. So all of these things were things that don't seem related, but they all relate to allowing for a safe space for students to be able to get all their needs met and then really focus on the academics or focus on going to Capital for their CNA classes. Right. And having a success rate of having 22 out of 24 CNA students graduate with credentials and now have employment, that is not just a win for the school, that is a win for the state. We have a crisis, a labor crisis in certain fields, and we are trying to fill those positions with ready to work, willing students that can be trained, that can be molded to use these opportunities as a stepping stone for bigger, greater things.
Amazing. Thanks for sharing all that. Christina, would love to bring you in from your position as a district administrator. What would you add or layer on?
Sure. So my view as a superintendent, what's been most promising? So now we're entering year 4 of this Pathways program. So the part where students are informed about what's out there and those experiences. Just this year alone, we've had over 100 guest speakers for our high school of 160 students from various experiences and jobs come in and mentor. That mentor piece has helped really make that pathway guide come alive. So it's not just a book, it's not just the program of studies, but it lives and breathes with these relationships with the community. As we expand our partnerships, and just listening to Flora, like the sustainability financially, whether you're a large district or a small district, as these grants starts to sunset, how do we keep building these partnerships so as the ARP funds disappear, our industry partners and our local businesses continue to partner with us in ways that are, the human resource side of it, but there's also a financial component. And we've been very lucky that we're in a close distance from General Dynamics, and that we've been recognized as a district-wide school for electric boat. And that's the path forward, building those partnerships, which I think is much more challenging on this side of the state because of Southeastern. Even though we have the one partnership, we're not surrounded by a large city with a lot of those opportunities. So how do you continue to build and sustain what is showing great promise? Before we started this, we were looking at a graduation rate, low 80%. We're looking year after year, like 96, 97, 98% graduation rate. When we started this, our hopes and dreams, for us as a school system, in addition to helping students realize, what they're passionate about and what their pathway is, that 100% earn college credit before they leave us, and that 100% earn credit because they participated in an internship with a mentor. And we're well on our way. We've seen those numbers improve from 20, 30, 40% up to 75, 80% for the college credit and for the internship experience as well. So it's working, but the challenge is moving forward, right? When you build programs, very specialized programs with the right people in the right positions, building teams, how do you sustain that work moving forward and building capacity? And just thinking specifically about our multilingual learners, that challenge for us, how do we continue to provide the resources, the language resources that they need, so that they can truly access what we've created? As we all were submitting our equity plans for how to improve the diversity of our workforce, how can we build that capacity within our school system and within our communities? We have students that are gifted with 3, 4, 5 languages. How do we help them think about coming back to us, and helping us build that community capacity to meet the needs of these pathways moving forward? Yeah. There are a lot of thoughts. It's exciting. It's exciting to see it in the data. But for me, listening to the stories of my graduating seniors is always very powerful.
Definitely.
Right. But getting them more engaged.
Thank you for sharing all that. Shannon, I'm going to jump to you actually, and would love to hear, I know we've sort of talked a little bit about, several panelists have alluded to partnerships beyond the 4 walls of the school building. And so would love to hear from your perspective how these types of partnerships can really help schools maintain momentum while they're, of course, balancing so many other priorities that they need to be thinking about with their students.
Sure. So I think our theory of action is around the idea that it does take a community effort to educate students and be part of a collective responsibility to prepare our future, who is going to become our neighbors and our future, political leaders and all of those sorts of things. And so I think when we partner, we want to be viewed as extended capacity of the school system. We are in no way going to be coming in and trying to assert a certain approach if that's not what works for that school or district. And so we really take a lot of pride. It's an embedded model where we have members of our team who are based at the school, actually working in tandem with school counselors, educators, school administrators, the district, and in order to bring the work-based learning experiences to life for students. And it's typically in locations where that capacity isn't available. I also would argue that it's a pretty unique profile of the person that we are hiring as part of ReadyCT. It's somebody who has a real love of working with youth, an aptitude for working with young people, but also has connections to the business community and to key community-based partners. And that's not always something that's going to be baked into an educator preparation program for a certified counselor or teacher. And so I think we bring a unique knowledge and set of relationships that can add a lot of value to the school and for the students specifically. We are partnered with the State Chamber of Commerce, which is also a key piece of our structure, is that we have access to thousands of business members. We're co-located with them. We are separate 501c3s because we want to create a clear distinction between the constituencies that we serve. We are focused on students and educators. They are obviously focused on their business members, but by bringing those two forces together, we get access to business leaders to bring opportunity to students and educators. And that's just worked really, really effectively. Also helps strengthen, I think, our policy efforts when you have sort of a business voice and an educator voice at the table. So we're just looking to, again, go outside the four walls of the school, because that is something that I think enriches the experience for the students and the teachers. Two programs I'll just mention really briefly. One is our educator externship program. So we partner with the State Department of Education and the Connecticut Science Center and provide for teams of educators coming from schools that we partner with. They get to go out into the field and are placed in externships themselves as adult learners to experience different workplace settings so that they can bring that knowledge and experience back to the classroom with them, and then reconnect with those employer partners for future opportunities like guest speakers and job shadow days. And then we run a ton of just project-based programs that include paid internships, but one in particular is called GRIT, with the Get Ready immersive traineeship. And the focus of that is a structured supported internship where it's for students who maybe are still working on some of those employability skills, need a little extra support and encouragement to get to a place where they can feel really confident about being in a work site. So they come to a school as a home base during the day over 5 weeks during the summer, but they're assigned to a real world project with a business client who is looking for an end-to-end solution, either in the form of a prototype or a final deliverable, which is usually a presentation or a research study. And then the students work through that and meet with their client for 5 hours a week. And in the remaining time, they're working with instructional leaders and members of ReadyCT to do all the employability skill building, to focus on personal brand, to think about the way that they handle social media and think about time management. And then they're working on that project along the way. And a big focus at the end is presentation skills. They get to practice a lot. And then there's a big showcase at the end where they present to their individual client, usually on site at the business, as well as to their whole collective group of students. And they get to hear about each other's projects and what they've produced. And it's led to solutions that businesses are actually incorporating into their day-to-day. And so it's just really exciting to, that partnership, I think, is just critical for adding that connection to business that schools may or may not have that access to otherwise. And so just want to make more of that opportunity available.
Yes, so much energizing work. Thanks, Shannon, for sharing that. Eve, I want to bring you in as our current student. Would love to hear how you decided on your plan for after high school and what you feel your school is doing to support you and other kind of your friends and your peers, and also what you think your school maybe could do a better job of as your classmates are trying to align on your post-secondary plans.
Yes, so I was given the amazing opportunity to live on a college campus and try a pre-college program during between the summer of my sophomore and junior year. And it was definitely a program that was aimed towards giving low income and diverse students a chance at experiencing higher STEM education. And through it, I found my love for independence as well as the college experience. And I also found the experience really helpful in getting me the steps to learn how to achieve higher education in STEM. My school was really helpful with setting me up for college applications, especially with the programs they offer during the summer to help seniors with the transition, and setting up our Common App. I felt that they really helped. They really helped with the filling out the application, but I do think that they do need to provide more support for ensuring that students have access to mentorship and collaboration, as well as giving diverse students a chance to actually experience what it looks like for someone like them to be in a field such as STEM, especially since it can be so exclusionist at times, and very consistent patterns. I also feel that students who do take alternate paths should have, I forgot which panelist mentioned it before, but should feel celebrated when they do choose a path that's not just university. So just making sure that students are informed about their choices and that they are experiencing relief in their path.
Yeah, such good advice. Thank you, Eve, for sharing. Liz, would love to bring you into the conversation. When we talk about post-secondary planning that includes careers that don't require a college degree, there's rightfully, as Chelsea mentioned, a lot of concerns about perpetuating existing inequities, given the huge racial disparities in terms of which students do and don't have access to college. And so the question for you is, how can boards of education really support their districts to support students along multiple pathways while also really being intentional that they're not perpetuating inequitable patterns?
Wow, that's a very complicated question. I think, as I said before, we have the infrastructure in place to expose our students to a lot of different career paths. And one really wonderful partnership we have is with our Northwest Regional Workforce Board. And that's been an enormous success. We have over 800 students during the summer paid internships throughout our community. And that has really been wonderful. And I think those students really come back energized. They have real, they have money in their pocket, and they have been exposed to a lot. So I think building those partnerships with the Workforce Board has really been wonderful. And we're very lucky in Waterbury too. We are in a city that we have two major hospitals that we have our allied health, and we do graduate CNNs. They get jobs right away. We have an early childhood pathway where we have partnerships with our early childhood community, and those students get jobs right away. The manufacturing community in Waterbury. So we really have built those partnerships, and I think those really have been very genuine, and they really, it's almost, they need the help, they need the labor force, let's put it that way. So we have a lot of partnerships that will fill that gap. And we also, as I said, we have at Wilby High School, we have a new culinary program where they've opened a restaurant that's open to the public every Friday. We have the public coming, and the kids are great. They're very proud of their luncheons, and they serve you. It's just delightful. We've revitalized, thanks to ESSER dollars, we have really revitalized our agricultural pathway. We have retrofitted our greenhouse, and the kids are growing all kinds of vegetables and flowers, and it's really been amazing. So I think what we're trying to do is, as everybody is saying here, explore, give our kids opportunities to understand, be hands-on and be concrete. But the ESSER dollars really have helped us do a lot with our infrastructure, let's face it. And now we're struggling. How are we going to sustain some of these programs? So I think I'm going to call Ready Connecticut. It sounds like you're doing amazing work. So I think those are the kinds of partnerships we need. And then we have to go to the legislature and say, look, this is what you want. You want successful students. This is what we need to do it. I don't think we're clear enough. I don't think we're clear enough with the legislature, all that we're doing, and what the policies are that need to be changed. So I think this kind of a conversation is really important, because sometimes we just say we need new money and they're like, well, we give you a lot of money. So, you know, I
Liz,
think
that was such a great transition to our last question around the policy change, because
okay.
I couldn't have set it up better. So no, I appreciate it. I want to sneak in one more question before I turn it back over to Chelsea to help us wrap. And Flora, I'm going to go back to you if that's okay. And really, from your seat as a school leader, I know you alluded to a couple policy challenges earlier, but how might state level policy makers really implement changes that allow you to accelerate some of your work? If you kind of had their ear for a minute or two, what's the couple of things you want to make sure that they heard?
It's simple, and it's been said over and over. Ms. Brown just touched on it, is that these programs take funding, right? It takes funding to get a student credentials. It takes funding to get transportation. These things don't happen in isolation, and these programs aren't funded. So I know that there are issues with districts being flat funded for many, many years. Monies, you know, are hard to come by. There's a lot of stuff on the floor right now over which educational programs will get funded moving forward. But it goes back to my original statement in the first question. All students deserve these opportunities. And if we cannot talk about the labor shortages in Connecticut without addressing the elephant in the room, which is we have qualified personnel. We can get qualified personnel. They're ready to work. They're here. They're in our schools. But we need the resources, the financial resources, to be able to sustain these things. Right now, we've had very successful programs, incredibly successful programs that have changed the trajectory of student success at Hartford High. And honestly, with ESSER funds going away and not knowing what the funding will be like for the foreseeable future, we may lose a lot of those programs, right? And that is a loss to the community, but it's also a loss to industry. So we have to address those things in addition to addressing the special populations that we serve in our schools that deserve the same opportunities, deserve the same chances as everybody else. Because again, if we're going to serve all students, then we need to serve all students. It cannot be some students today and then some students tomorrow.
Such powerful words to wrap up our panel with. Thank you, Flora, and a huge thank you to all of our wonderful panelists for sharing snippets into the incredibly inspiring work that you're all doing. I'm going to pass the microphone back over to Chelsea to help us wrap up in our last couple of minutes.
Great. I will just echo the thank yous. Thank you so much to our panelists. It's been a privilege to get to hear from each of you. Thank you to our audience members who have listened in today. And a huge thank you to both CABE and CAPSS for hosting today's webinar. We really appreciate the opportunity to share, and it does feel like an important moment in time in the state of Connecticut and beyond around these issues of supporting a good life for every student and individual post-secondary pathways of their own choosing. You may have noticed I put a short form in the chat box to everybody. We would really appreciate any feedback you can share. There are 2 super quick questions in that poll. And then on the slide, if you didn't grab the link to the report, or Maddy's and my email addresses are both here. We would love to continue to engage with anyone in follow-up conversations about this really important topic. So with that, Patrice, shall I hand it back to you just to...
Sure. Thank you all very much to Maddy and Chelsea, and especially to our panel members who took time out of your very busy commitments. We really appreciate that. This webinar will be archived on the CABE website. So if you have colleagues that didn't have the opportunity to participate live today, please direct them to the CABE website and they'll be able to access it there. So we look forward to building on what we've heard today and on the recommendations in this report as we continue our work going forward. Thank you all and have a good afternoon.